Greetings, Wastelanders! This is a compilation of over 1 hour and 15 minutes of Fallout Creatures Explained. Sit back, relax, and grab your sugar bombs. Let's kick things off with the most horrifying Fallout monsters explained. The Contaminated Zone is a world very different from the one we know. The Great War, Vault-Tec experiments, the radioactive Holocaust, and 1,000 other factors have turned what was once US soil into a terrifying melting pot of oddities and monstrosities that, from the abandoned recesses where they had been forgotten, have finally spilled out like plagues and spread throughout the game world. Horrific, grotesque, and extremely dangerous creatures now inhabit these lands, making travel across the continent an increasingly risky and unpredictable endeavor. These beings have adapted to the post-apocalyptic world even more than humans themselves, and have thus found a way not only to survive, but even to proliferate. Today, we will discover some of the most frightening aberrations we might encounter while exploring the world of Fallout: mutated beasts. Let's start with something easy, something we might consider almost familiar. After the nuclear winter, not only humans but many common creatures had to deal with the enormous amount of radiation that enveloped everything. The key to survival has always been adaptation, and only those who somehow managed not to succumb and evolve had the chance to carry on their species. There are many beasts that we could easily recognize as descendants of something familiar, but which have now become strange or developed new and unpredictable physical characteristics. After all, radiation opens up endless possibilities, and you never know what paths various animals may have decided to take. Brahmins are nothing more than the heirs of the old cattle that developed an additional head. At first glance, this is the main feature that distinguishes them, but in reality, many of their organs have doubled in number compared to their pre-apocalypse counterparts. Despite their grotesque appearance, Brahmins perfectly fulfill the same role as their ancestors, being used not only to produce extremely nutritious meat, but also milk, fertilizer, and they are also extraordinary beasts of burden. Along the same lines, we also find the bighorners, mutant sheep that are significantly larger than their originals, and have equally larger and harder heads and horns. Fortunately, they too are generally harmless creatures, so much so that they have been domesticated by many modern communities. Let's take a step forward and start talking about something a little more dangerous. Not only domesticated animals, but also many predators have had to take a forced step forward in the evolutionary ladder. Refinement of their predatory instincts, perfection of their natural weapons, and often a frightening increase in size. These are the weapons available to the new generations of predators in the contaminated area. Insects are perhaps among the most insidious creatures one can encounter today. Cockroaches, flies, and mosquitoes have in many cases grown to frightening sizes and have become real threats to travelers in the contaminated zone. Imagine a swarm of bloat flies, flies as big as basketballs and as aggressive as wasps. They would have no trouble taking down an adult man in a matter of seconds. Many small mammals have suffered a similar fate. Rats, moles, and even many dogs, forced to survive in a completely contaminated world, have become larger, more rabid, and feral, so much so that they will attack any other creature on sight in search of food. Pig rats, for example, are a perfect example of unpredictable hybrid evolution. It's impossible to identify them as descendants of one species or the other. With a rat-like head but a distinctly pig-like snout, they are ravenous and aggressive beasts, capable of attacking with both sharp claws and rodent-like fangs. In the contaminated zone, it's said that they perfectly combine the malice of rats with the bottomless hunger of pigs. Truly delightful creatures. Finally, at the top of this category are 3 particularly dangerous creatures, capable of quickly dispatching any unwary player who decides to face them without proper equipment. The first is the Gulper, a creature resembling a salamander, but whose adult specimens surpass the size of a human. Native to the East Coast, they are thought to be the result not only of common radiation, but also of the mysterious fog that constantly covers Mount Desert Island. They are cunning enemies, often seen clinging to trees or lampposts, waiting to ambush passersby. Another mutated beast that should definitely be avoided is the Yao Guai, a hairless bear of larger-than-life size and exceptionally aggressive nature. Bears are already fearsome creatures in their own right, but the Yao Guai have thick skin that can withstand even numerous bullets, extreme life force, and the ability to take down a character in just a few hits. An encounter with this creature, at worst, means a serious risk of game over. At best, it means a massive drain on all your resources before you can take it down. Megasloths are sloths that, due to radiation, have grown to an enormous size, far larger than an average human. They have long, sharp claws, generally used for climbing rather than fighting. Many can live for centuries, and the oldest specimens often contain entire colonies of mushrooms whose poisonous spores discourage enemies from attacking. Unlike the 2 previous mutated beasts, Megasloths are actually quite peaceful creatures and rarely attack the player unless prompted. However, once combat begins, they prove to be formidable foes, intelligent enough to even use the poison in their mushrooms mushrooms as a battle resource. Bloodworms. Not only land creatures, but also those of the deep sea have inevitably suffered the consequences of the apocalypse. The ocean has always concealed mysteries and terrifying beasts. These beings, in the decades following the Great War, decided to emerge, more dangerous than ever, ready to reclaim the terrestrial world as well. Let's investigate together some of the most terrifying specimens we might encounter. Remember Tremors? Those movies with man-eating worms as big as cars? Well, bloodworms are a wonderful nod to this franchise. Fortunately, they don't reach the size of their cinematic cousins, but their hunger for flesh is certainly no less. Once exclusively aquatic creatures, after the bombs fell, they learned to adapt to life on land. They reached a size comparable to that of a human, and, most importantly, developed the ability to burrow into the earth almost as easily as they once swam in the ocean. Their appearance has also changed, having to adapt to the need to move across solid ground. Their skin, once soft and viscous, is now covered with a solid exoskeleton from which emerge several spikes that the creature uses to plow through even the toughest materials. Its mouth is tripartite with a split jaw, and its bite is capable of splitting rocks. Their hunting strategy is usually ambush, surprising unsuspecting creatures crossing their territory by emerging from the ground at high speed. Even the larvae, waiting to fully develop, are still dangerous. They typically hide inside the carcasses of other creatures, such as Brahmin or bighorn sheep, feeding on their flesh. They then literally explode out of them as soon as they sense a new victim approaching. Mirelurks. The next one is a truly insidious creature that has the potential to become a veritable war machine, capable of wiping out entire camps and making areas completely inaccessible to those who do not wish to meet a horrible death. Mirelurks are mutated crustaceans, and hold the record as the first mutated monster ever to appear on US soil. Their origins likely date back to before the war, with the extreme marine pollution caused by the illegal disposal of industrial waste by multinationals such as Poseidon Energy and General Atomics. Reports already referred to an anomalous increase in the crustacean's size, but they were ignored as unimportant or even used as advertising for the high quality and abundance of the fish. After the bombs fell, these creatures underwent a second mutation, transforming them into true monsters of the deep. Mirelurks live primarily in colonies, though it's not uncommon to encounter individual specimens along the coasts. They appear to possess a very precise internal hierarchy, with easily distinguishable classes. A common mirelurk is a hybrid between a horseshoe crab and a blue crab. They are nearly as tall as an average human, and their most recognizable feature is the thick, helmet-shaped chitin shell that covers almost the entire body. This shield is extremely resistant, so much so that, in times of danger, mirelurks often prefer to retreat inside it rather than attempt to escape. Beneath it are two main arms equipped with large claws, usually used to grasp prey, while the two smaller arms tear at its flesh. They are the equivalent of worker ants, and their tasks include protecting the nest from intruders and scavenging for food along the beaches. Despite their fearsome nature and the difficulty of hunting them due to their natural defenses, many consider mirelurk meat a delicacy, and there are even hunters who specialize in hunting them. Alongside them are the mirelurk hunters, a variant clearly more similar to lobsters, dedicated to actively foraging. Lacking a shell, they lack the same defenses as the workers, but they have larger, more powerful claws, ideal for taking down even large prey. They are also capable of spitting an extremely dangerous corrosive substance from a distance. They are naturally much more aggressive, but also relatively easier to take down. Just don't get too close. Now let's talk about a true heavyweight in the marine ecosystem, the mirelurk king. This superspecies evolved completely independently from its peers, so much so that it looks much more like a humanoid hybridized with a reptile than a crustacean. Its skin is scaly and red, and its entire body is covered in long, sharp spines connected to sharp membranes that resemble a crown and a cape, giving it its name. It possesses the ability to blend into its surroundings to the point of becoming almost invisible, a deadly power when you consider that its strength is even greater than that of a mirelurk hunter. It has even developed the unique ability of possessing both gills and lungs, making it a hunter perfectly adapted to both ocean and land. Strength, speed, cunning, and intelligence. But that's not all. It seems that the mirelurk king is even able to establish a telepathic network with its peers, coordinating attacks during battle, a true king at the helm of his army. Finally, we come to the true pinnacle of this pyramid, a creature whose mere presence can cause entire armies to retreat, a true monster among monsters, the mirelurk queen. Standing 25 feet tall, its appearance epitomizes all the best features of its progeny. An iron-hard shell covers its back, 6 powerful legs allow it to charge at lightning speed against its enemies, and its claws have evolved into extremely sharp scythes. It is also capable of launching a long-range acid blast that can penetrate even the toughest armor. The most common reaction to encountering such a monster is generally to flee. Alternatively, if you absolutely must face it, it would be best to have a heavily armed battalion or weapons that match its destructive power, because the queen will not be brought down by a few simple bombs: ghouls. Now let's move on to humans, or at least something that was once human. Even what was thought to be the most intelligent species on the planet was powerless against the terrifying power of the radiation it itself unleashed, like a mouse building its own trap. And this time, the effects are beyond imagination. Do you know what a video game set in a post-nuclear apocalypse universe inevitably needs? Zombies. And ghouls are the closest thing we'll ever encounter. Not all contaminated humans reach this stage, but it's certain that most would have preferred to simply die from radioactive poisoning. Ghoulization is nothing more than the effect of exposure to extremely high levels of radiation. The resulting mutation has led ghouls to develop many unique characteristics. Some useful, others monstrous. A ghoul can live for centuries if it doesn't suffer any particular accidents. They are also now resistant to radiation, physical damage, and are even capable of regenerating if the damage is not too severe. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to stop the general decay of body tissue that constantly afflicts mutants. The skin rots and shrinks, exposing the underlying muscles, and over time, they begin to lose the main soft appendages of the body, such as ears and noses, to the point of becoming uncannily similar to the undead of popular imagination. But what's worse is that often the effect of the mutation on their brain, or the simple chronic suffering many of them suffer, causes ghouls to regress, losing most of their cognitive abilities and transforming into true monsters. Ghouls who retain their sanity usually prefer to live in close communities with other ghouls, ashamed of their appearance. But no one is surprised by their existence anymore, and aside from a few extremist factions, most communities happily accept their presence. Those who go mad are condemned to live in a near infinite hell, wandering for decades in the place of their transformation, waiting for some passerby to relieve them of their pain. There are numerous cases of shelters or vaults inhabited solely by feral ghouls, sealed in their desperate doom since the outbreak of the Great War. One final curiosity: not only can humans transform into ghouls, but there have also been cases of animals developing this mutation. In particular, among the people of Boston, there has long been a legend of a ghoulified whale present in the bay, said to have lived there for over 200 years. Trogs. Ghoulification, however, is not the only terrible path down which mutation can push the human species. There are equally, if not more, undesirable variants. What was once the city of Pittsburgh is now nothing more than a disaster zone, ironically nicknamed the Pit by its inhabitants. In this area, radiation and the poisons produced over the years by the city's numerous industries have allowed the development of a new anomaly that has tormented citizens since the Great War: troglodyte degeneration contagion. This is a degenerative disease that causes extensive skin damage and alters brain chemistry, causing those infected to degenerate into veritable feral men, the trogs. According to Dr. Kundanika, a scientist and resident of the Pit, when the disease is in its early stages, simply leaving the area for a few months is enough to completely cure the illness. However, according to the doctor's research, as many as 20% of all adults in the Pit are destined to transform into trogs if left untreated. Furthermore, generation after generation, more and more children are born already infected and with a very low chance of survival. The trogs, once fully transformed, lose all memory of their past lives. Many of them live in small groups at the bottom of the Pit and often venture out to pillage and raid the city above. Some more evolved forms seem to preserve a sort of primitive language, understandable only by members of their own species. What's truly frightening about this disease is its utter avoidability. The inhabitants of the Pit may find a new place to live and solve this problem at its root, but now that is their home. A home that the multinationals of the old world have transformed into a contaminated grave, leaving its inhabitants in limbo between the daunting threat of disease and the terror of having to abandon what they have known as their everyday life all their lives, and from which they can no longer detach themselves. Spore carriers. In many ways, spore carriers can be compared to ghouls. They too were once human, but their bodies, corrupted by a mysterious spore, have become human-plant hybrids. Their behavior is that of a beast. Although they may possess a sort of hive mind directly connected to the spore's will, they can live indefinitely and have a high regenerative capacity guaranteed by the effect of mutation. Spore carriers originated in Vault 22, where Vault-Tec conducted experiments on fungi, plants, and mosses to develop specimens capable of sustaining humanity in the post-apocalyptic world. Among the various subjects of study was this spore with prodigious abilities. Able to attach itself to any type of plant, it allowed the host organism to become resistant to poisons, radiation, and attacks from pests. Furthermore, it was even capable of reviving practically dead subjects. Blinded by the potential of their discovery, the scientists unfortunately failed to realize that the spore was not only capable of bonding with plants, but with any life form. As often happens, they realized too late that almost all of them had already been infected infected. By the time the player arrives in Vault 22, the mutated scientists are still there, perfectly adapted to the new plant world the spore has created, incapable of dying and ingrained only with the desire to spread their own infection. The spore carriers appear only vaguely human. They often lie within thick bushes in a state of quiet torpor. Their faces have lost many of their original features, leaving only a mouth with sharp teeth. Their skin has turned green, and numerous inflorescences grow from their backs, helping them blend in with the surrounding vegetation. They generally move on all fours, and are known to ambush unwary visitors who approach their hiding places without realizing their presence. They use their clawed hands to slice through their enemy's flesh, but the greatest danger comes if we don't kill them quickly enough. Once they reach low health, spore carriers explode in seconds, scattering the spores they carry within them, along with a significant amount of radiation. Nothing human remains of these creatures. They have become simple yet perfect means of spreading their contamination. Tunnelers. Now, let's look at a type of creature whose origins are unclear, but which likely arose from numerous pre-war experiments aimed at creating humans with special abilities for battle. Tunnelers are creatures with an appearance somewhere between human and reptilian. Their skin is scaly, their hands have sharp claws, dangerous spikes emerge from their heads and shoulders, and two large bioluminescent yellow eyes are visible on their heads. As their name suggests, their habitat is underground. Their bodies are perfectly adapted for life underground, with hands and limbs designed for effortless digging and large fluorescent eyes ideal for perceiving their surroundings even in total darkness. However, this very evolution makes them highly susceptible to bright light, so much so that they rarely emerge to the surface. Ulysses, the main villain of the Lonesome Road DLC for Fallout New Vegas, speculates that if it weren't for their reluctance to abandon their territory, the tunnels could prove to be the greatest threat the West Coast could face, as it's impossible to know how many kilometers their tunnels extend in every direction, and therefore their true number. The entire California region could be walking across a veritable empire inhabited by hostile creatures and never even know it. Centaurs. Now let's turn the page and talk about the forced evolutionary virus, because not all mutations in the world of Fallout are caused by the simple effect of radiation. Many of the monsters we encounter are artificial, specifically modified in the laboratory in a blind race towards the most aberrant, controllable, and lethal monstrosity. The FEV is nothing more than an artificial virus developed by West Tech, with the primary goal of creating super soldiers who would revolutionize the American military. However, the serum proved unstable, causing the death of almost all of the subjects it was tested on. The desperate search for a stable solution sparked a series of research that, over the years, shaped many of the most terrifying monsters that now inhabit the new American territory. Do you like horror films? Do you have a passion for creatures so horrifying and so senseless they seem to come from another world? Then you'll be interested in learning more about centaurs. Exactly the kind of creature you wouldn't want to stumble upon in a dark forest or amid abandoned ruins. Even describing a centaur isn't easy, as each one typically has its own unique form. Let's start by saying that although some of their appendages have a human appearance, such as the torso or even the head, they are absolutely not mutated humans like ghouls or super mutants. Centaurs are, rather, a true chimera, an aberration born of terrible scientific experiments by the scientist Richard Moreau, known as the Master, creator of super mutants and advocate for a new type of humanity, driven to greater physical and mental heights thanks to the use of FEV made from parts of various animals and subjected to the effects of the virus. Centaurs possess bestial intelligence and are more similar in character to a yaoguai than to any human. Despite the extreme diversity of each creature, we can generally identify them into three types, each more terrifying than the last. It's impossible to say what evil purpose their creation had. The most common is probably the one-headed centaur. This version has four limbs similar to human arms, which it uses to move like a quadruped. Furthermore, long tentacles emerge from its jawless mouth, which the creature uses to grasp and immobilize its prey. The two-headed centaur, on the other hand, is an even more bestial and grotesque form. In addition to its humanoid head, it also has a second animal head, often a canine one. It's been observed that each head has its own will, but they seem barely aware of being separate creatures, so much so that the animal head often attempts to bite its twin. In any case, their limited intelligence gives them no trouble directing their bodies toward common goals, such as hunting. Finally, the many-headed centaur is a specimen that was supposed to appear in the fourth installment of Fallout, but was cut during development. They are, however, present in other media outside of video games. This variant is perhaps the most grotesque you're likely to encounter. As the name suggests, multiple snarling heads emerge chaotically from the torso, unclear as to whether they possess a common intelligence or are simply multiple brains driven by a destructive frenzy. Additional mouths filled with sharp fangs and multiple eyes are placed seemingly randomly across the creature's body, while limbs of various varying sizes emerge from every point on the torso, bizarrely giving it great mobility on any terrain and the ability to reach speeds sufficient to stalk almost any type of prey. Perhaps if there are any creatures born straight from nightmares in Fallout, they are the many-headed centaurs, floaters. Continuing along the lines of creatures mutated by the forced evolutionary virus, we find the floaters. These are invertebrates that are part of the long list of experiments conducted by the Master. Their name derives from their ability to produce very light gases within their bodies, allowing them to float in mid-air. Despite their clumsy appearance, they use their sinuous bodies and extreme lightness to float around with agility and ambush their prey. They can often be seen in the company of centaurs, with whom they have a symbiotic relationship, or even super mutants, who often raise them as pets. They do not possess a true brain, but like many invertebrates, they have a nervous system that grants them minimal animal faculties. There are two variants of floaters, very different in appearance, but with similar biological characteristics. The floaters found on the west coast have a main body that doubles as a head, attached to which is a long tail that it whips through the air to propel itself. At the top of the head is a mouth from which the creature unfurls a long, tentacled tongue, culminating in a second mouth used to latch onto its victim, much like an alien. The gas they produce to support their weight is flammable, and, if exposed to high temperatures, ignites within moments. The floaters found in the Appalachian Mountains are what we might consider more of an evolution than a variant. Although similar in many features to their cousins, these monsters resemble bizarre balloons in appearance. The sac that produces the buoyant gas is located on the top of the head, and the main mouth is located on the front of the creature. It also has a large main eye, often accompanied by a varying number of smaller eyes, which are not always functional. In addition to the tail, Appalachian floaters also possess two long tentacled arms. Their entire body and limbs are covered in pulsating buboes, where the creature stores the powerful volatile gases it uses to fight. In this regard, the main difference from the West Coast floaters is the type of buoyant gas they can generate and use as a weapon. Depending on their habitat, these creatures develop the ability to generate up to 3 different types of gas, giving them different fluorescent colors: red for incendiary gas, blue for cryogenic gas, and green for acid gas. Snallygasters. Snallygasters are one of the bizarre creatures produced by the West Tech Research Center in an attempt to create stable, self-sustaining creatures using the forced evolutionary virus. This creature, however, was only the first step toward creating far more fearsome monsters. Snallygaster are grotesque, amorphous creatures. They move on 4 legs, but possess 6 limbs. The 2 central arms are long and strong, but the creature typically uses them for support when resting rather than as a weapon against prey. The 2 upper arms, however, are agile and tapered, with 3 fingers on each hand, culminating in 3 claws, ideal for hunting. The head is always extended forward, and is shaped like a large, eyeless bulb, almost entirely occupied by the glossa, a mouth full of dull but incredibly strong teeth. The eyes, however, are scattered across the torso, granting the Snallygaster a rather broad view of its surroundings. According to the scientists' plans, the creature was to be released near Huntersville to be monitored and studied in a natural environment. However, after a few years, some specimens eluded surveillance by sneaking past the control perimeter and spreading throughout the Appalachian mountain range. Grafton Monster. There are many legends surrounding cryptids in the Appalachian Mountains. Mysterious creatures that inhabit the forests, unlike any other known animal, shadows that prowl at night, searching for lost hikers, ready to make them their next prey. The Grafton Monster is precisely one such creature. It takes its name from the town near which it has been reportedly sighted several times, Grafton, West Virginia, and it was likely just one of many urban legends, until West Tech brought the myth to life. In fact, the Grafton Monster is nothing more than an improved version of the Snallygaster, having used the same DNA strain in the hope that the physical stability of its predecessor would also apply to a new form. The final prototype was recognized by scientists as a success, having produced a perfectly stable specimen, despite the use of FEV. But the truth is that what they got was nothing more than another amorphous, violent, and uncontrollable abomination. The Grafton Monster is a quadrupedal creature with an extremely stocky and powerful body, standing approximately 7.5 feet tall. Its 2 hind legs are shorter, while the front legs are long and extremely muscular, giving the monster a vaguely gorilla-like stance. At first glance, it doesn't appear to have a head, but in reality, it is completely recessed into its shoulders and enclosed within its exceptionally broad chest. Its body is also covered with glands that allow it to secrete an oily, extremely corrosive substance over a wide area around itself. It also appears to possess intelligence even lower than that of an animal, its only observed occupations being to wander aimlessly and attack with blind fury any life form it encounters. Once the experiments were concluded, the Grafton Monster was sedated and sent to the Ministry of Defense to evaluate its military uses. Unfortunately, this happened on the very day of the apocalypse. The intense light generated by the bomb's detonation caused the van driver to lose control of the vehicle. In a holotape recorded by the man himself, you can hear the sounds of the steel door being torn off and the creature walking away, finally free. Although this is the only incident we know of, we can encounter more than one Grafton monster in the game world. Why more of these aberrations are found in the Appalachian region today is a mystery. Super mutant behemoths. Finally, let's take a quick look at what we might consider the destructive pinnacle of the forced evolutionary virus, and the pinnacle of the super mutant race. Although the birth of these creatures was dictated more by the devastating randomness of fate than by any specific intention, in sheer size, it is probably the largest monster we'll ever encounter in all of Fallout. We're talking about the super mutant behemoth. Super mutants were once humans, who were the first to be experimented on with the forced evolutionary virus. The result of this exposure was the creation of an entirely new species, no longer comparable in their very identity to what they were before. Muscle development, loss of hair, increased size, and almost always, a decline in mental faculties. Super mutants are often hostile toward other species, and their developed taste for all kinds of meat does not help relationships. That said, the race possesses a wide variety of variants, as many as the FEV was capable of producing. But the one we're interested in today is by far the most dangerous. Truly mad giants, ready to trample and sweep away everything in their path. It seems that only super mutants originating on the East Coast have the potential to transform into behemoths. With no limit to the growth radiation can cause, these super mutants are likely the oldest specimens of their race, growing steadily year after year throughout their lives. Most specimens you encounter average 20 feet tall, but individuals over 30 feet tall have been encountered. Unfortunately, this effect seems to be accompanied by a near-total loss of intellectual ability, causing behemoths to slowly regress to a primal state where they are no longer capable of using any form of language other than guttural sounds. They can recognize their fellow creatures and follow very simple instructions, enough to allow them to enter battle armed with crude weapons, commensurate with their size and raise to the ground anything unfortunate enough to stand in their way. Their humanity has been lost for centuries, and they are nothing more than veritable monsters, impossible to approach without a healthy dose of madness or a desire for death. Fog crawlers. Since the Mirelurks may not have been enough, let's now shift our focus to other crustaceans we never want to encounter, and talk about another extreme danger ready to tear us apart as soon as we set foot in its hunting ground, the fog crawler. This creature has a super-resistant carapace, razor-sharp sickle-shaped legs, and a height similar to that of a grizzly bear on two legs, tall enough to even outshine super mutants, not to mention a terrible temper. Fog crawlers take their name from a particular type of fog, the fog, in which they hide to hunt their prey. As we've already seen with the gulpers, this mysterious fog covers Mount Desert Island and seems to be the cause of the extreme mutation of many creatures on the island. But what's truly curious is that such a trigger is not unique to that island. But we have a second similar yet completely unrelated case in the Appalachian mountain range. Here, in Vault 94, a Garden of Eden creation kit exploded, a device with the theoretical power to heal the radiation-contaminated land and allow new crops to be grown. The disaster caused considerable damage to the surrounding environment, even creating a radioactive fog similar to that found on Mount Desert Island. Thanks to this coincidence, new fog crawlers were able to develop in Appalachia, completely parallel to the specimens on the island. Due to their super predatory characteristics, these monsters are considered the most dangerous in the areas they inhabit. They are also capable of performing rudimentary signaling among members of the same species through low, guttural calls and organizing primitive, coordinated hunting strategies. Furthermore, unlike many mutated creatures, fog crawlers are also fertile. Although, due to some ancestral ritual implanted in their minds, they seem to seek out a mate to reproduce only during the nights of the new moon. Gator claws. Gator claws are the result of botched experiments with FEV at Nuka World's Safari Adventure Park, where they have currently built their nest. Their origins lie in the hands of a biologist named Dr. Darren McDermott, who studied animal reproduction in laboratories connected to the safari park. After the bombing, he was ghoulified, but decided to remain in the park and continue his studies. However, when various groups of bandits began plundering the park over the years, McDermott felt the need to develop a security system, something to keep unwanted guests away from his home. Thus, after discovering the corpse of a super mutant, he began a series of experiments aimed at creating a fearsome creature that would serve as the park's protector. After years of failed attempts, the doctor finally succeeded in developing the first gator claw, a creature derived from the combined DNA of Jackson's chameleon and American alligator, influenced by the effects of FEV. However, the biologist's predictions soon proved far too optimistic. After releasing the first beasts into the park, he quickly realized they were not as controllable as he had hoped. They were feral and aggressive creatures, so much so that they immediately turned against their creator, nearly killing him. Having miraculously escaped the wrath of his own creations and unable to return to the lab to shut down the incubation machine, McDermott had no choice but to abandon the site and leave directions on how to reach the machine and stop the production of those deadly beasts, hoping that one day someone foolhardy enough to attempt the feat would come along. Gator claws are humanoid in appearance, having 2 legs and 2 arms, and preferring to walk on 2 legs. However, many of their characteristics recall the animal from which they take their name. They possess a robust tail that they can use as a weapon to lash out at their enemies. Their heads resemble those of alligators, with an elongated shape and wide mouth. Their skin is scaly, often covered with sharp spikes. The scales are incredibly resistant, allowing them to survive even numerous gunshots. Their claws are not particularly long, but they are extremely tough, allowing them to carve even the hardest materials. Fortunately, this monster can be encountered almost exclusively in the safari park area. However, Dr. McDermott in his messages has predicted the rapid expansion of their territory if the machinery that develops their embryos is not stopped soon. Deathclaws. Here we finally come to the icing on the cake, the monster of monsters, the creature you've all been waiting for, which has become a true icon and, in a way, the very symbol of the Fallout saga, the Deathclaw. Were you looking for the devil? Were you looking for a demon? You found it. Probably nothing in the world of Fallout beats the Deathclaws in terms of endurance, adaptability, and pure physical power. They are beings designed to be perfect machines of destruction, concentrating all the characteristics of the most fearsome predators in a single creature. The Deathclaw's DNA is based primarily on Jackson's chameleon, like the Gator Claw, but it also incorporates an unknown number of forced genetic grafts and mutations. They can reach a height of 10 feet and an average weight of 1,600 pounds, although frighteningly larger specimens have been cited. They generally move bipedally, but use their front legs to make short charges against enemies. The forelimbs are long and muscular, culminating in 5 clawed digits capable of cutting an unarmored human in 2 with a single blow. The hide is extremely thick and flexible, giving it extreme resistance to both slashing and blunt force damage. Energy weapons and heavier firearms are ideal for combating such a beast, but even basic versions of these can prove equally ineffective. Their origins lie in secret pre-war government experiments. During the escalation of the Sino-American War, the US government was seeking new weapons to use in the Alaskan conflict to reduce the loss of soldier lives. In this context, we know that for the first time, the Deathclaws were unleashed as true weapons of mass destruction, wiping out every trace of the invader in the territory. However, the army already realized they had gone too far. These creatures are pure predators, impossible to train, capable only of wreaking havoc. Following the apocalypse, many specimens escaped from their containment zones, spreading over the years throughout the United States. Despite their extreme danger and aggression, Deathclaws typically prefer to establish their nests in wilderness areas, far from human presence. This is likely because their highly developed senses make them highly sensitive to chaos and loud noises. They often even choose areas with high levels of radioactive contamination, where no other creature would survive, but where they find an ideal habitat, having developed total immunity to contamination. These monsters primarily operate in groups, although lone specimens can occasionally be encountered. The pack is always led by a pair, an alpha male and female, generally the 2 strongest specimens. The Deathclaw's mentality is almost obsessively oriented toward reproduction. The alpha impregnates all the females, and the other males contribute to protecting the eggs and new offspring. Because of this extreme instinct, eradicating a Deathclaw nest can prove nearly impossible unless all the individuals are exterminated, or at least the pack leaders are killed simultaneously. If only one of the 2 survives, it simply chooses a new mate in the hierarchy and continues to raise the next generation. In fact, the areas or buildings where Deathclaws have established their nests are often considered lost forever. There is a very particular and dramatic case involving this species. In 2023, the Enclave captured several specimens to evaluate, as the US Army had done 2 centuries earlier, their potential use as weapons. Seeking to learn from past mistakes, scientists dosed the creatures with the forced evolutionary virus, which made them highly intelligent and capable of understanding commands. Most of them demonstrated the same level of mental capacity as an 8-year-old child, but others later proved to be as intelligent as average humans, and even capable of reproducing a simple form of their language. These newly enhanced Deathclaws were first used in the evacuation of Vault 13, kidnapping its inhabitants. However, the more intelligent specimens soon began to question the morality of the Enclave's actions, ultimately organizing a full-blown rebellion that allowed them to escape the organization's clutches. Once they escaped, the group took over Vault 13 itself, organizing themselves into a small, peaceful, and prosperous society. So much so that soon, despite the initial inevitable mistrust, many humans living in the areas surrounding the refuge decided to move inside to benefit from the protection of the Deathclaws themselves, creating a multi-species mini-society unlike anything ever seen in history. Unfortunately, this This ideal could not last forever. The Enclave, determined to avenge the wrong they had suffered and having deemed the intelligent Deathclaws as unmanageable as their common relatives, decided to send a specialized strike team that, after a strenuous battle, exterminated the entire pack plus all the civilians present in the vault. A tragic end for what could have been a milestone towards the future of the Fallout world. As far as we know, however, 2 specimens survived the massacre. Gorus, the Deathclaw companion of the protagonist of the second video game, was far from the refuge at the time of the attack, pursuing the Chosen One. And Zarn, another specimen held by the same Enclave at their base in Navarro. After the events of Fallout 2, we have no further information regarding the fate of these 2 individuals, but we can imagine that at least one of them has found a way to continue the lineage. In fact, in Fallout Shelter, we will have the opportunity to meet not 1, but 2 intelligent Deathclaws, an unnamed specimen, and Kura, a female described as a wise Deathclaw. Even as of the TV show, Deathclaws remain a very real presence in the wasteland, and can tear apart both flesh and armor, at least whenever the plot calls for it. It just goes to show how the Deathclaw is truly the most horrifying monster in Fallout. The oceans of the Fallout universe are a mystery in themselves, with the only times we've been given the chance to venture off the coast, being the Far Harbor DLC and the first Fallout's endgame mission where you travel to the Enclave oil rig. With the oceans so vast, known to many as the final frontier, we know more about the galaxy around us than the depths of Earth's waters. So today we are going to explore the biggest ocean mysteries of Fallout. 1. Where is the fishing? Where are the fish coming from? And could there be clear waters off the coast? With 70% of our planet covered by the ocean and only 80% of that uncharted, we still do not know what waits down there to be discovered. And throughout the Fallout series, we are introduced to many fishing operations, indicating that life still exists in the waters off the coast, but we are never shown ships that could be delivering shipments of fish to the shore. The only ships we see that are still in operation are not used for this purpose. If you dive into the waters, you'll find that they're heavily irradiated. This is due to the fact that groundwater is considered the hidden connection between the land and the ocean. Over time, the groundwater would pull radiation from the soil to the ocean and further contaminate its waters. This explains why entering the ocean without protection will still irradiate you, despite 200 years having passed since the bombs stopped. That isn't all, as any chemicals left over from pre-war civilizations would wash into the oceans over time and kill off all marine life. The Monongahela River is a prime example of this, as the waterways surrounding Pittsburgh become so heavily irradiated that despite being safe to cross further down its flow in 2104 at the time of Fallout 76, during the events of the Pit DLC of Fallout 3 that takes place in 2277, the waters are impossible to cross as they are far too irradiated and polluted. Eating fish from these waters would almost certainly be poisonous for anyone that isn't a ghoul. The regional maps for the first 2 games depict that there is a bright green area of radiation surrounding the shore, but outside of that it seems to show clear water. With the canon of certain depictions in those games being challenged by minor retcons each installment, could this be proof that there is far less radiation in the waters outside the coast? And could the fish we see all throughout the series be breeding there before venturing to the coast? We see the byproduct of fishing operations all over, so they have to be coming from somewhere. Is there a chance that survivors could be venturing into the oceans to fish before returning to the shore? We don't know where these fish are coming from, but we do know that there is a distinct lack of fishing vessels. Could origins of what fish we do find be from a mysterious underwater civilization that could destroy the surface world at any time? 2. Entity in the depths. Could there be eldritch horrors just below the waters? This mystery began with the release of Fallout 3, where we are introduced to a mysterious pre-war cult existing in the Point Lookout National Park, where bombs never fell, the area bordered by the Atlantic Ocean. We only meet one member of this cult, Obadiah Blackhall, who tasks the player with finding his book, the Krivbekni, and guides you to a site where swamp folk conduct ritualistic sacrifice. During this quest, you will meet a Christian missionary by the name of Marcella, who claims that Obadiah plans to use the Krivbekni to control the swamp folk, a tribe of hostile inbred mutants who may have been that way long before the war. Arriving at the ritual site, after killing the swamp folk, you will find the Krivbekni in the middle of a shrine littered with gore. Returning to Marcella, you'll find her dead, having been attacked by smugglers hired by Obadiah. She, however, left a holotape with instructions on how to destroy the Krivbekni. You will have to travel back to DC, to the Dunwich building, where you'll make your way to its basement, known as the Virulent Underchambers. There you'll find a feral ghoul who stands by a note that reads, sharp knife to send him to a deep temple. Flay and say my words. Abdul comes again on the Feast of the Weaker, feast for the Deep Temple, born again, here, Alhazared Gieth Gieth. Nearby is the obelisk of Ugh-Qualtoth. If you activate it, the book, and all nearby feral ghouls will burst into flames. The questline is over and answers are never fully given. In Fallout 4, there is a mystifying location known as Dunwich Borers, owned by the same company as the Dunwich building from Fallout 3, which is a pre-war marble quarry with a dark twist. You will have to fight your way through raiders to get inside, but inside you will find clues that it might not be your average marble quarry. The raiders were there to collect scrap metal, but the underlings began to complain to their bosses that the place was haunted. Clearing out the raiders, you'll start to have visions of cult rituals. These will continue until you enter the last room of the quarry, where you'll be granted a vision of a pre-war sacrificial ritual involving a strange blade known as Kremv's Tooth. From there, you can swim into an underwater chamber where you will come face to face with a colossal statue of immense size. The next step of this mystery takes us to Fallout 76, where there are 3 locations that each bear scenes of ritualistic sacrifice and have those colossal heads hidden within. The first location is Tanagra Town, which is an entire city lifted out of the ground and into the air by all-consuming vines that have started to take over the minds of the various denizens of the wastelands. These vines are even capable of taking over ghouls and Grafton monsters, transforming them into their Strangler variants. The second location is Organ Cave, which is home to a large group of Mothman cultists who have been making sacrifices to their god in this cave. The same head from Dunwich Borers can be found embedded in one of the walls of the cave. The cave is also home to a large source of water. The last of the 3 is in the same room of an ancient entity that the cult of the Mothman is making sacrifices to, and it seems to be healing. With the release of the Gone Fishin' expansion, there is now a basket of fish offerings to the entity. This creature is alive and will bleed if damaged, but does not react. This creature is known as Interloper, and its body is entirely plant-like, with root-like appendages, a human-like torso, and limbs that appear like arms. This creature is not alone, as there is another that can be found near White Springs in a cave known as the Deep. This one is in a dormant state and will not bleed, being seemingly inactive. There may be more colossal heads and ancient entities hidden in the oceans of the world, as every location they appear in contains water. With the Gone Fishin' update, a captain by the name of Raymond Clark and a strange humanoid creature known as the Fisherman, who appears similar to a lake lurk from Fallout New Vegas. Raymond Clark will try to reveal more about the Fisherman, pointing towards a sinister secret held by it, but before he can speak up, he is met with a jolt of pain and will only speak good of the creature after. The Fisherman is constantly processing fish and acquires the player's help in obtaining more. Next to him can be found a note with a depiction of a creature that is nearly identical to the Interloper. Raymond Clark claims that he and the Fisherman are from the East. But considering that he is a ship captain, could he have been enthralled by the Fisherman in the ocean and forced to obey his commands? Could the Fisherman be a servant of an ancient entity that's seeking to consume all life on Earth? This whole mystery is very similar to the H.P. Lovecraft novel The Shadow over Innsmouth, which depicts a backwater town on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in Massachusetts. The locals of Innsmouth are known for having the Innsmouth look, and it's later revealed that the population has been breeding with a humanoid frog-like fish species known as the Deep Ones in exchange for gold and an extended lifespan for their youth, forming a cult around them. The Deep Ones live in an advanced civilization beneath the Atlantic Ocean, and were stated to be so powerful that they could topple humanity entirely if they wanted to. To appease the Deep Ones, the people of Innsmouth would make offerings of beads and human sacrifices, after which the Deep Ones would reward the locals with golden jewelry of alien design and a plentiful harvest of fish. As this trade continued, each generation began to look more and more fishy as they aged. At old age, they would descend into the ocean to join the Deep Ones. This seems to parallel the strange appearance of the swamp folk from the Point Lookout DLC, while the Deep Ones themselves are supposed to look a lot like what the Fisherman looks like. So, could he be a Deep One human hybrid at the advanced stages of its lifespan, or could he be a Deep One himself? Though we never see signs of this eldritch civilization, we can find signs that something more human could be going on beneath the waters of the Commonwealth. 3. Underwater structure. In the Commonwealth wasteland of Fallout 4, you can find plenty of mysteries hidden in the waters off the coast, including massive pipelines leading to a convergence point that stretches across the waters along the map. These pipelines originally would have led to a piece of cut content. Vault 120, a completely submerged vault. The quest line that would have taken you there, 20 leagues under the sea, was cut during its final stages. The vault would have had a unique overseer that was a sentient giant squid. You would have entered the vault alongside Captain Zhao of the Yangtze 31, a barely functional Chinese nuclear submarine now stuck in the shallow waters just northeast of the 4-lead fish packing plant. During the story, you would have discovered that the vault dwellers had rebelled against the sentient giant squid, but not much else is known. What we do know is that practically everything related to Vault 120 was scrubbed from the game, so why are the pipes still clearly visible in-game? Could they have decided to scrap the entire thing in exchange for a potential new enemy that might make an appearance in later games? Could that be the source of the Commonwealth Brotherhood struggles that was mentioned by Scribe Harkness in the Amazon TV show? Who knows? But what we can conclude is that those pipes were left there for a reason. What that reason is, we'll have to wait and see. Though this might be explored in a later installment of the series, this next one is so strange that it may never be explored further, only added to with weird and humorous locations. 4. Cove Mannequins. Just off the coast south of Haddock Cove, you can find the underwater wreckage of a pre-war cargo ship that contains several mannequins in various different poses. Some of them are even armed with weapons, and those that do have the now skeletal remains of the former crew scattered around them. Right away, it brings into question what exactly happened here, as none of these mannequins should have stayed in place once the ship sunk. We have some answers, but it only leads to further questions. You can find a note written by the captain, titled, "These mannequins," floating inside the boat's cabin next to one of the armed mannequins. It reads, "I can't wait to drop these damn mannequins off. The crew is starting to claim that they are hearing weird noises from the cargo. Maybe they are just playing pranks on me. Whatever. We are almost there." Judging by the skeletal remains nearby, it's clear that the captain should have investigated the crew's concerns. There are no clear answers, as mannequins are inanimate objects and should not be able to harm anyone. What we do know is that the Institute had only just begun the brain scanning program that would lead to the creation of the synths, like Nick and Dima, so they could not have been synths. Many have theorized that the mannequins could have been possessed by some eldritch entity, maybe even Ugg-Qualtoth itself, and used them as puppets to massacre the crew as a sacrifice. If this is true, the threat Ugg-Qualtoth poses could be greater than anyone predicted. There are no survivors to recount what occurred on this vessel, but this is not true for every encounter of the unknown in the waters of the post-nuclear wasteland. 5. Leviathans of the Deep. Could there be massive leviathans lurking in the deep, destroying vessels? And that is why global trade is off limits? Throughout real-world history, explorers would often mark maps with depictions of strange and massive creations. These creatures would act as a warning to others. Do not go here because there be monsters. In the Fallout universe, we are not so lucky, as the Pip-Boy can provide no warning for what we may encounter. Wastelanders are no strangers to massive aquatic beasts, with Mirelurk queens towering over most structures. With armor thicker than power armor, they can take down even super mutant behemoths. Could there be more such creatures lurking deeper in the waters that have grown larger than we could ever imagine due to radiation? In a terminal entry found at the Nahant Oceanological Society in Fallout 4, we can find evidence that with minor radiation before the war, marine crustaceans began to grow into the Mirelurks we know today, with the entry saying that there is an increase in average mass by 14% in crabs and 12% in lobsters. And that was before the war, with 200 years having passed between now and then. There is no telling how large some marine life could have mutated. Throughout Fallout 4 and 76, we can find the skeletal remains of whales. But in Fallout 4, when walking through Bunker Hill, you can overhear two caravan guards having a conversation about an encounter that one of the guards' grandfather had with a truly massive blue ghoul whale, known by the older Wastelanders as Olpeg, though this could have been the Yangtze 31. A seasoned Wastelander would know otherwise. The guard would then go on to say that if the other guard does not believe them, that they can ask any of the old folk about the gigantic monsters that can be found in the deep. While walking the coast in Fallout 4 and 76, it's not uncommon to come across the remains of both small fish and larger marine life, including large mutated dolphins known to Wastelanders as dollfish. We may never know the truth behind the legend of Olpeg, but what we do know is that it wasn't the only deep-sea leviathan within the oceans of Fallout, as the previously mentioned giant squid overseer would have been something truly terrifying to behold. The FEV contaminating the groundwaters across the wasteland would have flowed into the ocean in isolated quantities over time. So with this, we can question what monsters might be out there. I'm sure I speak for us all when I say that it would be amazing to battle against an underwater giant and truly test ourselves against the unknown. Whether we ever will, well, that's a story for another day. 6. Undetonated warheads. Could there be two undetonated nuclear warheads just off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting to go off, which would devastate its waters? If that happened, it would destroy whatever semblance of an ecosystem that has managed to survive, which allowed the fishing we see in Fallout 3, 4, and 76. In the Atlantic City expansion for Fallout 76, Horacio Cruz is a member of the Showmen, a faction of performers who control the Atlantic City boardwalk as well as the Aquarium of the Atlantic. He runs the Most Sensational game, which gives contestants the opportunity to become its champion if they can survive a brutal blood sport where they'll be pitted against abominations and other contestants as they battle their way to the end. It's a reference to The Most Dangerous Game, a novel written by Richard Connell in 1924. Talking to Horacio Cruz, he will say, "They say it was not our enemies that irradiated these waters, but ourselves, that a transport aircraft suffered an engine failure and was forced to jettison its precious cargo into the waiting depths off this very coast." He goes on to say that nobody really knows if they detonated far below the surface or if they still lay there on the ocean floor, waiting for the day when they finally crack open and release their payload. This seems to be a reference to a real-world event that happened way back in 1957, when a C-124 Globemaster transport aircraft for the United States Air Force had to shut down 2 of its engines and return to Atlantic City, though it would jettison 3 nuclear bombs and 1 nuclear core into the ocean before doing so. The 3 nuclear bombs lacked their cores, so they were labeled as not a threat. What exactly happened remains a highly classified secret and has never been divulged, but the bombs and nuclear core were never located. But in the Fallout series, it seems as though the ones that had been dropped were indeed armed and could explode at any minute if they haven't already. And if they do, will it be the doom of all those who survive off the fish caught from the Atlantic Ocean? Enclave Oil Rig, FEV. After the destruction of the Enclave Oil Rig in Fallout 2, we are left with the assumption that all the FEV that the Enclave had been testing on and left behind on the oil rig had been destroyed. But what if it hadn't? The oil rig was the Enclave's main command site from the months before the war until it was destroyed in 2241. It was constructed by Poseidon Energy and built over an underwater oil deposit in the Pacific Ocean, 175 miles off the coast of California. The Sierra Depot of the Galaxy News Network reported that it was built over the last remaining uncapped oil reserve, which China previously had a claim to. However, the Chinese had their oil platform project sabotaged, allowing the United States to seize the reserve for themselves. This is one of the primary sparks that ignited the Great War and led to the events that destroyed the pre-war world. Little did China know, they could have taken out most of the upper echelons of the United States government with one well-placed missile on the structure. Not having done this allowed the Enclave to thrive once everyone else had been annihilated due to the nuclear fallout. There, the Enclave would test the effects of FEV until they had finally perfected FEV Curling 13, which, if exposed to the wasteland, would have caused a genocide so great that only Vault inhabitants and the Enclave could have survived. But with the Enclave having left the FEV behind during their evacuation of the oil rig, wouldn't it have gone into the ocean when the oil rig exploded and its ruins collapsed into the waters? If so, it could have led to the birth of an untold number of horrific abominations that could be festering off the coast of California. There is also the chance that FEV Curling 13 could have survived in the oceans and could be the reason why we see the decaying remains of so many fish, whales, and dollfish along the coast. If it's affecting marine life, could it reach the land and begin to kill off the mutated populations of the world? We can only wait to see what happens, as this extinction level event would change the game series forever. 8. What lies beyond? Though we have never been shown much of what lies beyond the coast of the United States wasteland, we do know that there are at least pockets of survivors out there that have made it to the United States. Many of you might know of Alistair Tenpenny from Fallout 3, who is the owner and proprietor of Tenpenny Tower. But did you know that he hails from the post-nuclear wastelands of Great Britain? He crossed the ocean to seek fortune in the capital wasteland, but he will not mention anything about his life before arriving in the United States. However, searching Tenpenny Tower for any lead as to what has become of life overseas is not a dead end. There is another traveler from a foreign land living there, and that's Irving Cheng, who claims to be a direct descendant of the chairman of the People's Republic of China, who was their leader until at least 2077. Irving writes in his computer terminal that his father was one of the leading officers in the Chinese army, which indicates that some form of the Chinese Communist Party still survives there. As to how either of them arrived in the United States is unknown, but in Fallout 4, there is another clue. While traveling through the Commonwealth, you can come across the wreck of the FMS Northern Star, a pre-war cargo ship. Climbing aboard this wreckage, you will encounter raiders who will shout in Norwegian as they try to stop your approach. Though the sole survivor does not speak Norwegian, their lines can be translated to, "Leave us alone, get off our ship, what do you want from us?" And even, "I'm coming home," as they're dying. There are no ways to effectively communicate with them, so you can either leave them alone or wipe them out entirely. We don't know for sure when they arrived and are led to believe that they became stranded after the bombs dropped, as they are all ghouls. But what if they arrived far later and became ghouls during whatever catastrophic event that led to their ship crashing into the coast of Boston? Could Norway still have a shipping industry that operates throughout Europe and maintain a sort of loose supply network in order to stabilize the European wasteland? I for one hope we get answers, as the outside world is a gray area in the Fallout lore and it would be fantastic to travel overseas, or perhaps they could make a game that takes place in an entirely new nation to explore. The oceans have always been a resource that has led to the survival of nations throughout human history, that has continued to provide food, water, and trade. All of that betters the livelihoods of those affected by it. But what would happen if we suddenly lost our ability to traverse the waters? Everything would collapse and society would once more be rendered into tribes of hunter-gatherers, as we see in the more landlocked regions of the Fallout series. This has been Fallout's biggest ocean mysteries explained. From a unique pale wolf that cares for her pups to an unknown bloodsucker monster, today I'm going to explore some of the most mysterious cryptid creatures of Fallout, starting with a hard one that begins with a person committing cannibalism: Wendigo. The Wendigos are mutated humanoids that we meet and fight in Appalachia. We know that the progenitor Wendigo was named Morris Stevens, and at some point before the transformation happened, he ate human flesh. Since then, mere days after the bombs fell, he mutated and became connected to the act of cannibalism. Fallout 76 had a lot of problems, but it also has some of the best enemies, and the Wendigos are in my top 5. It's explained in the game that they originated from the Wendigo cave, but it was never clarified what was real and what was a legend. We don't know at what point the legend originated, but we do know that it became a reality the day when the mutated Stevens arrived there and made it his home. He became the first, and consequently, the progenitor of the Wendigo as we know them. The fact that Wendigos originated from one zone doesn't mean they aren't found in other parts of the map when we explore Appalachia. They appear in multiple zones, as their numbers are enormous at this point, but talking about their origins is still a bit tricky. Only a handful of them can be traced to a human, or a named human to be more precise. Each person had unique circumstances, so it's hard to point out everything, but a constant can still be identified in every one of the cases. The consumption of human flesh prior to the transformation is the same thing that most people, myself included, believe had a huge impact on what caused the progenitor Wendigo to appear. Another question arises. This can be dismissed as a canon discrepancy, or perhaps they simply didn't have the idea yet, but nowhere outside of Appalachia do Wendigos exist, and this is not explained anywhere. For example, why weren't they common during the period before the Great War or in other zones like the Commonwealth or the Capital Wasteland? Obviously, if we try to stick to a logical in-game reason, it could be that the introduction of nuclear radiation was the catalyst for the mutation. Earl Williams, for example, was a cannibal locked in the Monongah mine by Hornwright Industries in 2076. Yes, this was before the bombs dropped. We don't know when the transformation happened, but it did happen. Details arise every now and then about this transformation. For example, many of the cases involved mental degeneration before transforming, but whether this is a requirement for the mutation remains unknown. In some of the latest updates, we can see that Wendigos can be found among the populace of feral ghouls. They could have mutated alongside them or simply work as a team, but whatever the reason, in Vault 79, for example, and other various zones, you can meet both, and they don't display hostility toward one another. Strange, but that's the way it works. Maybe they are a subtype of ghoul, but who knows? Maybe in the future we can learn more about them. Now, talking about creatures in Appalachia, another dangerous one exists and is unique: the Beast of Beckley. From the moment you learn a bit about her, you know that she is a dangerous wolf with a notorious reputation even before the Great War. Later, you discover that she is a subclass of wolf that is albino, with their den localized in Appalachia, which is part of a quest to find her. Commonly described as a pale monster seen near Beckley, the beast triggers Janelle Priblo to try to trap it, but the outcome? Well, another person showed up to help Janelle, but Raymond Priblo was killed by the beast. This triggered a sort of revenge quest between the beast and Janelle, who ultimately died trying to get out of the zone to assemble a hunting party, effectively showing how dangerous the creature is. From there, you enter enter the scene. Having explored the ash heap and investigated Janelle's camp, you can find some blood splatters. Follow the trails, and you will get some clues. This is the start of Unsolved Death and Taxidermy, a side quest about hunting this unique beast. Reading every note that involves the camp will make the Beast of Beckley appear on a small hill nearby. She will be marked as a legendary level albino wolf with some pups that defend her. Once you kill the beast, the quest is finished, and so many people are avenged. Also, it is one of the mysteries required to find the fabled Sheepsquatch. And following that idea, what is the Sheepsquatch? The Sheepsquatch? Oh boy, a myth that was an obsession for so many. For starters, this is one cryptid stalking the Appalachian Mountains that is not common but really famous. Many cryptid hunters were obsessed with finding one. For example, Calvin Van Lowe, a man who devoted his life to hunting at least one down. This is one of the species that was a myth from way before the Great War, but the knowledge was limited and not widespread. Only a few chosen ones were lucky or unlucky enough to know about them after the Great War. The Sheepsquatch took many lives, from students to experienced hunters and others, many others. This alone created a type of story that is shared in a bonfire on the cold night. Some of them talked about its size, horrendous factions, how dangerous it was, and all the experiences that you can feel being near it or even worse, fighting it. And also, we cannot forget the classic human curiosity. One of the most asked questions was basically all about the speculation of its origins. Now, talking about the enemy, it is always a legendary one-star enemy, so its strength matches the reputation of a highly dangerous creature. The movements are nothing that a vault dweller cannot handle, and with a bit of experience, you will beat it fairly easily, but it is still never a fight to take for granted, so be careful outside. Also, a unique detail about it is that in certain encounters, it will emerge from underground and howl, similar to the Deathclaws on Deathclaw Island. They cannot be permanently crippled. If you take out both legs, it will fall down for a few seconds and stand up again as normal. The fight itself is not impossible, but hard, so it's an interesting experience, to say the least. According to the in-game lore, it's not clear if they are one or multiple. Sometimes they are referred to as just one creature, and other times as a whole race. But it's worth noting that if they are legendary, the encounters are far from random, ignoring, obviously, the encounters through events, as they are guaranteed. Now we get a bit more sinister than the cryptid side, so smile a bit, would you? Smiling Man. Let's be honest here. The first time I found this dude, it scared me so badly. I didn't expect this type of sinister person, if you could call it that. This entity, person, or whatever, is still mostly a mystery to us. He is a wide person, vastly wide, more than any normal human being. And he also has an exaggerated and unsettling smile that will send chills down your spine, as you can see. He also claims different things every time you find him, but most of the time he suggests that he's lost and returning to Appalachia. Judging by the apparel alone, he looks like he's from before the Great War, as he continuously says that much has changed during his absence. In a certain way, he is similar to Mothman. When you encounter him in the random wasteland of Fallout 76 and you decide to attack him, he disappears in a burst of shadow, just like the random encounter with Mothman. He is also a part of the Rip Daring and the Cryptid Hunt, just for those completion hunters. The Smiling Man identifies himself as the historical figure Indrid Cold. This is seen in separate instances where he introduces himself as Indrid and adds to the conversation, "I am cold," when you talk about his coat, but he never fully says his name completely. So this is still a theory. Of the glimpses of lore that we can get, one of the most interesting ones is in the expeditions. The Pit Update. One particular terminal at the White Spring Refuge talks about the Smiling Man in a confusing way. The terminal explains the story of a catatonic patient left with the responders by a passing figure identified only as Bob. The curious point that aligns with the Smiling Man is that this patient, one day, simply disappeared. It is repeatedly mentioned that he had an aura that reminded one of a cold feeling when you were near him, and he also didn't give a cozy feeling, as he felt a bit sinister too. Nobody saw the patient depart or personally discharged him. He disappeared into thin air, so this story was reported as another ghost story. Another nod that is not as clear is at the Middle Mountain pit stop. It's mentioned by a terminal of Clyde that on a certain day, a man who visited the bar was grinning from ear to ear and was as wide, if not more, than humanly possible. What disrupts the reference is that he is described as someone who didn't speak a single word, highly unlikely for someone like the Smiling Man. A pilgrim of the cult of the Mothman speculates that the man and the cult are looking for similar things. In real life, this character is often in the same dimension as characters like Mothman, so to speak. This is interesting, but details of this relation, or what links both characters, have never been discussed. Only little bits of lore here and there. In-game, this relation is never explored or mentioned. To disturb you more, this person is actually identified and based on real life. A Smiling Man named Indrid Cold, from an Appalachian urban legend that is associated with the Mothman. This person was first reported in November 1966 on a road. A person named Woodrow Derenberger reported seeing a light when traveling and approached it expecting to help. He was met with a person who was not dangerous but unnerving, a man with a smile so wide that it never faded. It is reported that he spoke with Woodrow telepathically, introducing himself as Cold. He assured Woodrow that he meant no harm and wished only happiness for him. A direct nod in the game references this phrase too. He described him as a man with his arms crossed over his chest and his hands tucked under his armpits. This aspect is not reflected in the game, showing a more relaxed, you could say, version, but still as disturbing as the local legend. The image shown on the Rip Daring and the Cryptid Hunt scoreboard in the game is more accurate to the real version than the in-game model, but it's still an interesting cryptid that is a jump scare for me every time, as he appears with that smile in the most random and sinister places, scaring the living daylights out of me. And now let's see the heavyweight champions. The Old One is one of the non-modeled creatures, but the mystery still exists. The Old One? To this point, Lovecraft is a dark culture icon, but that doesn't mean that his creations are any less traumatizing, and Fallout does a great job of showing how these creatures influence the world. For starters, let's go to one of the famous mystery locations with a cryptic mystery in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Yeah, we are talking about Dunwich, and this is explored a bit in both games a bit, so let's dig in, literally. Yeah, we can all agree on one thing. Such things, locations, and residues of their religious beliefs in Dunwich shouldn't exist. The series plays with this every now and then. So I think it fits pretty well with the overall atmosphere and story of the world. We aren't discussing this from a purely logical standpoint. The games don't follow that approach, and that's why we love them. Remember that there is a fine line between logic in our own universe and the game's own universe. This is the sort of decision where you can have freedom, but still put things that fit in some way. It must fit, at the very least, in the contextual story the game tries to tell us. Ignoring everything about the actual exploration, as we already covered it, we start descending deep enough to get creepy vibes and explore a sinister atmosphere. This is where it starts getting cryptic. It's common enough, yeah, but you meet a handful of ghouls that start attacking you. After that, it's a journey of flashback experiences. The catch here is that those aren't yours. To be honest, it just makes you a bit uncomfortable. If you already have the context of Fallout 3 or have previously visited this zone, I highly recommend revisiting it. You will see things under a new light. When you push through, then you meet the Old One altars. This thing, if you could name it that way, is an altar with multiple nodes on the walls and stone pillars. Even if you can see the husk of one of the cultists performing rituals around an altar or body of water, continue a bit more and start diving. The journey is not over. Here lies a massive underground temple. Yeah, if you remember Fallout 3, they were looking for something similar. Who knows if this is the one? Curiously enough, if you start looking around in this place, you can conclude that in this altar, they kind of worship the bombs. And they also have a face carved into stone and a dagger. To be honest, I think the bombs were kind of random, put there for whatever reason, or maybe to throw pursuers off, but that is only speculation. This dagger isn't just any special weapon. It's a unique one, and it's named Kremva's Tooth, a sacrificial blade that does poison damage. Its existence alone tells a story. You know what that means. Sacrificial altars and a weapon exist? It shouldn't be, but it is. A cult doing rituals, and now the most important instrument is in your hands. The game itself doesn't even try to explain more than that, but I'm following the concept and analyzing the flashbacks a bit. Now, the people surrounding the water were worshippers of a god that was down there and commonly referred to as the Old One. We don't have much information about the particular altars or what they do. Another strange thing that creeps in a lot is that if you decide to continue and dive into the last part of this section, remember that this was an underground, forgotten part for many years. You can see a statue of an eye at the bottom of the water. This is a strong reference to any eldritch god that sleeps down here, as the legends say, and the book makes everything 10 times worse. As I explained, this follows a fine line between literature and a world built for Fallout, and it pairs well. Here lies a bit of that magic, as it is very much intentional. Well, maybe if you're already a Lovecraft fan, you'll understand, but for the average player, like me, we won't understand much. But if the game does things right, you will probably be invested in investigating outside the game, which happened to me. I could also add that it was there a long time, even before any of us existed, and clearly Dunwich and company had a certain multiple-step plan objective. God knows what they could have unleashed if the bombs hadn't stopped their plans. This is more a theory on my part than any real information out there, but it's presumably true that those ghouls that attacked you were turned by the influence of those malevolent gods. As you probably know, these gods see humans as mere ants or less. They don't look over us twice, so to speak, and yeah, if you worship them, that doesn't make a difference anyway. Well, I have to be fair about them. They aren't exactly malevolent, but they simply don't care about their worshippers or humanity itself. A piece of evidence that I can share is that in a previous previous game, Fallout 3 to be precise, you explore another instance of this type of creature. Exploring a bit, you can get to a DLC location, the Dunwich Building. Here you can get a recording of people turning into ghouls, without much of an explanation, but having a bit of knowledge about what they were looking for, it's pretty much clear that the influence of these gods is greater than the human mind can comprehend. I have to clarify that gameplay-wise, they function as any other ghoul, but we talked about it, so why not finish the whole idea of both games? Ugg-Qualtoth. This storyline is a bit strange. It all sort of begins in Fallout 3, and to this day is still only connected to Fallout 4. Yeah, separated by a whole generation of games, but still, both locations reference the Blackhall family. This is a fact that we know after exploring the building, but it's never clear in Fallout 4. You must link the facts and reach the conclusion. Okay, but before entering the Dunwich Borers building, we must talk about the whole region of Point Lookout. It's a rumor, but in general terms, most information that you can find is within religious zealotry, figures that are shrouded by insanity and mutations. We also learn that this figure is worshipped as a deity in the whole region. It's a rumor, but some information suggests strongly about this deity being worshipped for a considerable time before the war in the region, not only by Dunwich members. Talking about Constance Blackhall, if you played the DLC, then you will remember her well. If not, then she was a suspiciously long-lived woman who led a cult in Point Lookout. She acted as the priestess of the swamp folk before and after the war. What makes us believe that Ugg-Qualtoth and the Old One from the quarry of Fallout 4 are the same is the Krivbekni, an ancient book that talks about it, so it's tied to it. This book is the central piece of the occult affairs that the company Dunwich Borers used as a cover, and the mining operations are part of that creepy quarry in the Commonwealth. Another company issue that was a cover for the cult was the poor safety records, as the human sacrifices at Dunwich sites were obscured by the poor management, or a good way of covering tracks, if you see it that way. The strongest link is one that we cannot trace a particular action, but the information you can get says that Richard Dunwich, owner of Dunwich Borers and brother of the priestess of the cult, started a project to erect a building for the company in a remote location. At first glance, this was just a strange decision by a rich person. To be honest, this is not that uncommon. If you continue searching, then you learn about a cavern below the building that was drilled because they were searching for something in particular. When they reached deep enough, they cleared the zone of people and used a different bore drill by themselves, reaching a subterranean chamber on October 23rd. And yeah, you're correct, the day of the Great War. We don't know what happened there. We only know that Richard Dunwich gained access to an obelisk. At the same time, with the collusion of certain co-workers inside the Dunwich Borers quarry, employees were bound against their will, and by a ritual whose details we don't know, they were turned into feral ghouls. Yeah, without radiation or the bombs. This was the first documented event that testified to a taste of the power of the Old One, closing a circle in terms of learning that could be centered around Ugg-Qualtoth. Just before closing this point, it is believed in the canon of the game that the deep temple found below the Dunwich building was where the Old One lived and died by 2277. We don't know any more details. Okay, after all this context, let's start with what the game actually tells you, literally through gameplay. We know that in Point Lookout, for a considerable time, they have been worshipping something called Ugg-Qualtoth for generations. The fact about it being the Old One and all that, I think, is well explained. This entity, like most in the canon, is not exactly very well documented. Yeah, they aren't the most friendly or open to visitors either, but which one is? Remember that even in the original books, these beings are bigger than human minds themselves, so even if you can get to them, you will be guaranteed to go crazy or something, as you cannot see their forms either. They are another level of life form. What we can actually get here, or more correctly learn, is the name, and if we want to conserve our minds, that is as far as we can go. Maybe some facts here and there, and the reasons for the family owner of the quarry in Fallout 4 to do what they did. That's why I decided to provide all the context before, to better understand what you can find here. The architecture is very strange, referencing something ancient that lives beneath the earth. Something or some kind of investigation that got them very accurate data. You may think that this is obvious, given everything I already explained, but having those underground constructions be by chance is almost impossible. The temple was far too underground. Remember that we talked about the feral ghouls in the quarry and that the cult made that transformation via a ritual? If you haven't already made the link, that flashback sequence has a high possibility of being the same ritual that you can learn about in Fallout 3. In this case, we can see that it shows 4 cultists, and strangely, also shows 5 shadows. This may show you that an extra being is playing a part here. We may never know. Also, another thing to add is that in those flashbacks, if you're looking for details, then maybe you caught this. If not, then basically you can see on the walls that this extra shadow figure is following you. It is not as dangerous as it only appears in this area, but it follows you, and I found it creepy, to say the least. And here we are with the cherry on top of everything. In one of the terminals of Blackhall, Blackhall. A particularly important detail is mentioned: the book Father found in the Massachusetts mine. The priestess always had a book with her, and without following any logic, that book gives this woman an unnaturally long life, as we explained before, but we didn't delve into the details. I still think that this book's origin, besides the lore in the game, is a really clear reference to another Lovecraft story where reading a specific book drives people insane, as that knowledge simply does not fit in a human's mind. A book that canonically can make people crazy, cool, and at the same time dangerous. All the pieces for a maniac to commit serious crimes or events of dubious morals. And yet, it still had an extra purpose, so the story kinda comes full circle. But, well, the real-life counterpart is the Lovecraft book called The Dunwich Horror. Even the name is a reference. A cool detail, right? This story ends with the cult dying, and this also means that the old one died in the same place where it appeared, in the tomb that started everything. Everything started with the Crivbeckney ritualists, presumably a group of the swamp folk. As we already knew that Blackhall led them, Constance had a really big obsession with the occult, and used her inherited wealth to get a hold of artifacts like the book. This book was the pinnacle of the cult, and she, as the priestess, gained enough power to maintain a cult for years. But the end happened at some point when the book was stolen. This is general knowledge in the region, and is a local legend at the point that you get this info shared with you. Constance, the head of the cult, had the Crivbeckney stolen and died without it. We don't know precise details, but the structure of the cult fell apart. The legacy lives in the inhabitants, but it never got strong enough for the cult to reappear. This story kind of continues with Obadiah Blackhall, Constance's last remaining descendant, who wants to resume the occult studies. But it's up to the lone wanderer to follow that quest, and to this day, we don't have the continuation of this character. Speaking of legends, has anybody told you the story of the Chupacabras? Chupacabras. This one is a bit of a scam, appearing in Fallout New Vegas in a strange but cool mini-quest around the town of Novak. The premise is simple. In the game, everyone knows about the legendary creature of Puerto Rican origin, and No Bark Noonan explains to you that the Chupacabras are killing and have killed several Brahmin around the town, so you can decide to help. If you wait around for enough time and prepare an ambush, you will find your monster, and it's actually a Nightkin. Yeah, a bummer, but still, a Nightkin is not a normal enemy. It's cool in its own way, just in case you don't know. A Nightkin is a super mutant in the elite class. It was created by the Master at Mariposa Military Base as part of a team in a clan named Unity, basically the Master's own military team. It's a transformation of unambiguous honor, but at the same time they were provided with the finest equipment that the Unity could muster. Talking about this case, Stealth Boys. Fits with the context and paired with the lore, it explains, well, why he used that approach. Remember that in Fallout 1, the Unity was destroyed. Also, we have to add that the remnants of the Unity are traumatized by the events of the first game, where the Vault Dweller assassinates their master, so at that point, they decided to rely more on their stealth gear. In this case, one of them killed the Brahmin with the use of Stealth Boys. So, no aliens here, folks. This clan has so much story, but it is a topic for another video.